Al Newhart Media Center. This is Just Hear Me Out with Peyton Byers.
Hello and welcome everybody to Just Hear Me Out. I'm your host Peyton Byers here on KEOR 91.1 FM Vermilion. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day. Welcome back. So today we're going to have a little bit of a different show. I'm going to go over just one little thing, and then we're going to bring in Brayden Case as our special guest, and we're going to have a long conversation today. But first, the opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of this station, the USD Department of Media and Journalism, or the University of South Dakota. And as always, if you like the show, don't forget to go follow the show on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook at Just Hear Me Out 91.1, Twitter at Just Hear Me Out SD. If you'd like to listen to previous episodes of the show, they are available on YouTube by searching Just Hear Me Out, and there's also links to the YouTube on the Facebook page. If you disagree with me and you'd like to come on the show and talk to me about any issue, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or Twitter, and we can see if we can work something out, get you in on the show. But first thing I wanted to go over on the show today, I wasn't going to do a whole lot of newsy stuff today. I was gonna keep it chill, keep it philosophical with my guest Brayden Case, but there's one thing that caught my eye that I just can't. I just have to go over it real quick. So a video went viral on Twitter. It's got over 53 million views on Twitter right now, and all sorts of people are getting all worked up over it. So before I give you any context or anything, I'm just going to show you the video clip that went viral on Twitter and everybody was going nuts about. So this is what that sounded like.
We have people coming into the country or trying to come in. We're stopping a lot of them. But we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals, and we're taking them out of the country at a level and at a rate that's never happened before.
So that's the clip. That was President Trump talking, and so a bunch of people got that clip. Somebody cut that off C-SPAN, and people went absolutely nuts over it, which I can see why they went nuts. But here is the thing here. So what they're missing is context. So actually, a bunch of people put it on Twitter, and they commented like, "This is what he's saying about all illegal immigrants. He's saying that illegal immigrants are animals, and that he's dehumanizing them and stuff, and he's Hitler." Like literally, everybody's calling him Hitler. And if that's what he was saying, I'd be like, okay, yeah, he called all he called all immigrants of any kind animals. That is probably pretty bad, but that's not what he did. So let's listen to the full clip, and let's listen to it with some context and see the question that he was asked beforehand, or the comment made beforehand that provoked that response.
Thank you. There could be an MS-13 gang member I know about. If they don't reach a certain threshold, I cannot tell ICE about them.
Yeah. We have people coming into the country or trying to come in. We're stopping a lot of them. But we're taking people out of the country. You wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people. These are animals, and we're taking them out of the country at a level and at a rate that's never happened before.
So there we are. We have the context, and now you might not have heard. Basically, a reporter was talking about, or I think it was actually sheriff. This was a convention of a bunch of different county sheriffs, I believe, and she mentioned how she knows there's an MS-13 gang member, she cannot do anything about it, even if they're a known gang member, until they do a certain amount of things personally themselves, and like. Anyway, and so Trump was, saying, okay, yeah, we've taken out these MS-13 gang members, and he called the MS-13 gang members animals, not all illegal immigrants. That's an important distinction to make, because MS-13's motto is literally, quote, rape, control, kill. So, I mean, I would say that's almost animal-like. So I think people just need to, by taking this out of context and by trying to paint Trump as Hitler, and like, if he says actually bad, like Hitlerian things, you shouldn't have to take him out of context to get him. You should be able to get him with actual quotes in context with regards to if he was actually that bad. So if you can find something that he says that's bad like that, I'll stand beside you and I'll go, yep, in context that was bad. Okay, I agree with you. But if you're going to quote people out of context, I can't stand behind that. So people just need to quit being stupid and ignoring context. Anyway, so that's enough of that. Now to the fun philosophical side of things. I've got my in-studio guest, Brayden Case. Say hi, Brayden.
Hello.
So I've had you on the show before, and we talked about gun control, I believe, the last time. And that was an interesting discussion. I have a lot of conversations with Brayden in our dorm rooms and stuff, and it's always really interesting to talk to him. He's got a lot of interesting perspectives on stuff, and he's willing to have a good debate, and he'll admit when he's wrong, and he'll stick to what he believes when he's right. So Anyway, so you want to give us a little rundown on like what your major is, what you're doing, your whole situation?
Well, currently I'm majoring in philosophy and I'm double majoring, and I'm considering switching to a history major from my current med bio major because I actually don't want to be a doctor anymore. Rather be a lawyer. So that's interesting. Anyway, philosophy's always been interesting to me ever since I was just a little kid. And when I was in debate, which was 1 year, I was in debate for 1 year. I did it. What's called Lincoln Douglas debate, which is where you basically debate a morality.
You're an LD or?
Yeah, in a given, setting. So that's always very fun. So, I like to, just have some words, just, share some discussions. That was good.
What made you decide, or why'd you switch from wanting to be a doctor to, like, why'd you switch doctor to lawyer?
Well, it's because I found that when I was looking at what was entailed with being a doctor, that I wasn't very enthused about it. I'm very conscious of my own autonomy, especially given that I've always grown up listening to my dad, and my dad always complains about not having enough autonomy in his job, and he's a pharmacist. But being a lawyer totally gives that to me much more than being a doctor would. And there's a couple of other things, mostly given that I really like having discussions about stuff like this. I really like, I think that I'm particularly clear-headed in a civil discussion. I think that's one of my strengths. I don't necessarily think I have a strength in medicine, and I think that you should play to your strengths when you're picking a career. So that's what I did.
Well, that's great. So we're going to get into some more philosophical stuff because I know that's what you like to debate about and talk about is the large-scale, broad, conceptual topics. So here we go. Ready for this?
Oh, yeah.
What is the meaning of life? No, we'll go. It's not that simple, though. Like, let's actually think about it here. So what part of life do you think, like, brings meaning to people's life? What makes life worthwhile?
Well, I guess when you're asking this question, you have to, define it in a certain fashion. So when you say what is the meaning to life, most people are like, well, that's a,
42.
That's a stupid question. Like, you can't even begin to answer that, and it's because it's phrased so vaguely. Like, the question, what is the meaning of life, is questioned so vaguely. Because, just generally, if you ask what's the meaning of life, the answer will be nothing, because there is no set meaning to life if you don't have a religion. So you can either look at it from two perspectives. One is that a creator imbued it with meaning. Then the meaning of life is, the will of the creator. Most people would say God, because this is a very Christian country. And but if there isn't, then you're left without any, given meaning to anything. It's just kind of there for its own sake. So without that, people just define that question as like, okay, so there isn't anything. That doesn't mean that you can't phrase the question somewhat differently and still find, the kind of answer that you're looking for when you say, like, what's the meaning in a person's life? Then that would probably be, the question would be how to live a good life, or what makes a meaningful life.
So let's go with that. Let's go. What should a person aim for in their life to make it meaningful or to make it, worthwhile? What should people aim at?
Okay, well, I'm not gonna lie, it's a hard question. I don't think anybody has an answer to it. Nobody's like, okay, so this is how you live a meaningful life. Take some notes and then follow my every word, because you're all doing it wrong.
Well, I don't think there's a definite answer, but I've seen. Do you know who Jordan Peterson is? Dr. Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, I've heard of him.
He's a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, and he's famous for some other stuff. But he's got some really interesting lectures, and his perspective is, he says, he's like, or what he's figured out is he thinks responsibility is the true meaning. Like, I wish I could be as articulate as him and get his argument completely correct. But basically, people need responsibility to make it, because say we're looking at it from the atheist perspective and saying there is no meaning, whatever. Well, that's a really miserable life to live. Like living thinking the whole time like there's no meaning. I'm worth nothing. I'm a frail creature who can die easily and get sick. And what use am I? You know, but I think we can derive a lot of meaning. Like responsibility is something that is like tremendously empowering. Like if you go and like have responsibility, you can say, look, I did this thing. I'm responsible for creating this or like maintaining this. And I think that helps a lot of people. And like that's what the goal should be, is to carry as much responsibility as you can handle. So like the Christian way of saying it would be like to carry your cross, or like, you know, just carry a load, you know.
Does he say like what your responsibility should be? Does he say how you should live your life?
No, it's completely open. Like just be responsible. There's no set response. He's like, just because you know if you're being like a lazy bum or if you're completely worthless, like deep down, you know, you might be trying to like disguise it from yourself and like make it be like, it's not that bad. I'm doing it because this is excuse A, excuse B. But a lot of people, like deep down, you know. And I think the whole point he tries to make is that you should yearn to do, you should seek out to do that yourself, because that's what's going to make or probably provide happiness. Because like a lot of the focus, at least in politics and stuff recently, has been on, you know, like freedoms, rights, like rights, everybody, like give these people rights. But there hasn't ever really been, and he talks about this a lot, there hasn't been a whole lot of conversations about responsibility. Like, because take like modern day feminism, for example. Like a lot of the more radical side of that movement spends a lot of their time bashing the patriarchy and saying like patriarchal males are the reason, like the white males are the reason for everything that's bad, and like they are the embodiment of evil. And I think that's just unfair, I'd say, because, well, it's just not fair, because you're generalizing them by a group and you're ignoring the individual at that point. And
yeah, I mean, you can definitely see why they're wrong, and you can definitely see why Jordan Peterson has something going for him, that responsibility is super important for what you're doing. Actually, if you're going to define that in a more philosophical way, because that's what I do, if you read one of the most prominent modern philosophers, or philosopher if you prefer, is John Paul Sartre. And he wrote a lot about existentialism. And what existentialism is, if no one's heard of it, which I'm pretty sure you might have at least heard somebody throw it out thinking they were smart but using it incorrectly. Existentialism basically purports that it's a kind of a chicken and the egg situation, taking a stance on that. So you're either made with what's called like an essence, which is a purpose, or you come into existence. So essentialism, which is the opposite of existentialism, says that you have an essence from a creator, and then you exist. It comes in that specific order, kind of like the analogy is a butter knife. There's a purpose in mind, the essence of a butter knife, and then they created it. And that butter knife has the purpose of being a goddamn butter knife. And that the same holds for people. But existentialism says that you exist and then purpose comes. You decide your essence. One makes their own purpose in life. And that's basically what he says. He says that anybody that like tries to throw off like the yoke of like their own responsibility for their actions is a coward and is just like being irresponsible, just not taking full responsibility for their actions. And that's very important, especially when you're talking about feminism, when those people obviously are just throwing out words just in an anger and using a kind of platform that people might listen to them to spread biased views, because obviously if you think about what evil is, a patriarchal male doesn't live up to that definition. And if you make a broad statement about males, because every male is probably somewhat patriarchal, given that we grow up in a patriarchy, then you're saying that half of the entire planet is evil, which is just ridiculous.
For those of you just tuning in, this is Just Hear Me Out. I'm your host, Peyton Byers, here with my guest, Brayden Case, and we were talking about, just philosophical questions. And so I'm going to kind of jump off where you left off. So I think part of the issue, I know where I was at, but I got to think about how to articulate it here. So like modern day, so you have like millennials, and a lot of people complain about them, and there's a lot of, especially like young millennial males, I think, or like young males even. I won't even say millennial because like we're moving on from that generation
Right.
as well. But like that, like sometimes they're characterized as being lazy and stuff, and I'm sure like there's plenty of hardworking ones out there too, but there's also a lot of like lazy ones, and looking into like why is that, so I think part of it is first of all, they're not taking on responsibility, and like the feminist movement that's like pushing that stuff, that like if you're like white patriarchal male, you're automatically the embodiment of evil. I think some people see that and they're like, well, if I'm that, then why am I even going to try if I'm automatically that? What use is there in trying to do anything,
Right. But I don't think anybody can convince somebody else that they're evil.
True. We'll go with that. Yeah, true. But like, okay, so they stay young. So, and another thing is like, I think a lot of like part of growing up is like so as a child, you're like an infinite, you can do anything. Like
A blank slate.
a blank slate,
Tabula
yes.
rasa.
But, ooh. Okay, Locke.
There's some French for you.
So basically you're a blank slate,
Or
right?
is that
But then
Latin?
when you
Maybe that's Latin. Whatever. What were you
anyway,
saying?
so like when you grow up though, like you take on a trade, right? You take on whatever your career is going to be, right? And so you have to like narrow yourself down to become, because like you have infinite possibilities as a child, but there becomes a point where you have to choose one of those and latch on to other, because you don't want to be a jack of all trades. You want to like master something, right? Ideally. So you have to let the other ones go to take one, and then so you take that and you master it, and then after you master that, like possibilities open back up for you, because then say you get really good at that trade and you practice stuff, so you become good at it and hopefully successful, probably successful if you work hard enough at it, and then you're opened up to a whole nother list of possibilities.
So are you saying that leading a good life or picking a good career choice is determinant on your success?
No, not that's not exactly what I'm going for. So
See, that's what makes it hard, is because people struggle to define exactly what they mean by good in this instance.
yeah, good.
So if I can, like, add on to what you were saying, there's a philosopher. Her name is Susan Wolf, and she has written about this topic, about what leads a good life, and mostly what is a meaningless life. If we're going back to the question of what gives life meaning, and what doesn't give life meaning, she said, is when one person does not have goals. That it is what goals that give people like a drive. So that's when you say like laziness, like lazy bums, like they're a bunch of wastes to society, a bunch of millennial like hooligans. What are they doing with their lives? It's because you're thinking that they don't have any like real goals. They're just flying by the seat of their pants. And that's what she defines as being, she calls it the blob. And it's a person without any goals or aspirations, nothing that they really want to achieve in life. And that's what she said doesn't give life meaning. That what does give it meaning is picking a goal. That any goal, well, not any goal. I mean, there's some, obviously, once you decide that a life has meaning, once you pick a goal, then you can start going into the minutia of what makes one goal better than another goal, which is hard and not the same for every person, which is the key, is that not everybody should have the same goal. But you can say that, okay, so this person wants to be happier. I can literally find no fault in that because it's their goal, it's not my goal, right?
See, is happiness an appropriate goal? Like, I mean, obviously everybody wants to be happy, right? But I think if you set your goal, because like ideally when you set a goal, your goal is to achieve said goal, and like you won't be satisfied unless you achieve that goal. And so if you set your goal as happiness, well, that's a really hard thing to, because you can be successful at other things and you still not be happy. Like tragedies can come up, you can like get sick or something, or someone you love can die, all sorts of bad stuff can happen. So I think setting happiness as a goal is kind of dangerous. I think instead of searching for happiness, you should search, like this is another thing Jordan Peterson says a lot, is search for meaning. Like that's his whole thing. Like don't search for happiness, search for meaning, because happiness can come and go in like different times in your life, but meaning like you can have meaning and not be happy. Like if you feel like you're still doing something worthwhile and you're still fighting for good, it's a lot more achievable goal, and you'll be satisfied more by that. And I think it's interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, if you consider that, see, that's when like you start getting away from like how to live a meaningful life to like what's like an ethical or good life, and that's its own debate. Like ethicality, like an ethical code is very, very debatable about what makes an ethical code, if there is an ethical code that we can all live by. But that definition that she gave was just very very like basal, very like foundational. Like this, when you say somebody's wasting their life or is not wasting their life. So you may think, okay, well, they're not doing with their life what they could, but are they wasting it? Well, they're just trying to be happier. So I guess I can't say they're wasting their life. Like, it's not like they're not just like sitting on a couch eating chips, mindlessly staring at the TV like a bunch of blobs, like wastes to society. Like, this person's actually like, they're there, they're doing their life, they're trying to make the most of it, so they're not wasting it.
I mean, as long as those people, as long as in their pursuits or whatever they're doing, I think that's like if they're doing. Oh man, I need to speak. So it's okay for them to do that as long as their pursuit of happiness, like which they have the right to, as long as that doesn't hinder anybody else.
Right. That's where you get into the ethical code. Is that like people tend to have like a negative utilitarian view on things, which is kind of a buzzword. But if you throw what I mean by that is that like utilitarianism means like the most happiness for the most people. Anti-utilitarianism means like decreasing like distress and like disdain and like harm. Like minimize harm. So like that's what makes an ethical life. So that person is not leading an ethical life because he's Hitler and he murdered 6 million Jews. Okay, that is the opposite of not causing harm. So that is very, very bad, and he isn't a person. So that's how you would like define like what's a good life, I think, is once you start getting to what your moral code is.
So yeah, very interesting. I don't know, for those of you listening, this might sound like a bunch of gibberish, or it might sound like an actual two people speaking. I have no idea. He's a lot more articulate than I am so far, I think. But let's move on to some other stuff that I wanted to talk about. Or like I'll finish up the thought that I was having on, if I can remember what I was going to finish up. I have so many things running through my head. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I was talking about young men,
young millennials being
disenfranchised
by the feminism,
the feminist movement, like the radical ends of the feminist movement that basically, so basically here's this. So a lot of them say, okay, women are only making 77 cents on the dollar, and you can look at the stats and you can say, well, it's not, there's no institutional level to that. It's all like career choice and stuff like that, and like choice of hours worked and stuff like that. So it's broken down, and it's not, there's nobody out there that's saying, we will pay the women less money, because if there was that, then more people would hire more women, because then they could get the same labor for less money. But I think a lot of people have finally, like, they're like, okay, you got us there, but even though it is by choice, we should change it to make it so women do make the exact same amount, whether or not it's their choice. Because like they're trying to push, like, okay, we need to change society then, and it's like, why? I mean, would that be good?
That's a very interesting stance to take, and I think that really shows a sign of the times that it's like really changing a lot, because now everyone's arguing for fairness, which is not capitalism, by the way. That is a hallmark of something that's definitely coming up in this country, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm not saying that it's bad because of its name. I think that's kind of a buzzword nowadays, is that people are like, oh, you just said the S word, but socialism is what that would be, is that like you're kind of looking at it as a fairness standpoint, that everybody should be making the same money, everybody should have the same things given to them.
See, I think that would degenerate society greatly, though.
It's a very interesting debate. I think both have their strengths and weaknesses. I definitely think that people like capitalism. I think people are like, this is pretty all right, because it goes right along with your individual natural instincts. But people don't want it to be too with natural instincts, because in a state of nature, nobody wants that. That's the reason that we made a government in the first place, is so that we weren't in nature. So that we have this system that, like, the government keeps us all nice and safe and happy. And so people are like, cut down the rich, make me richer. And then that's when it starts getting into, like, I want everybody to be the same. Or, like, this person, just because they're not as smart as this guy, they don't make as much money. So they can't be a rocket scientist.
What do you think is the highest priority? Equality of opportunity or equality of outcome? Because essentially that's the argument, is it not? Like,
well, I mean, I guess you don't have to pick and choose one or the other. If you're a socialist, let's say. So let's say I'm a socialist, and I'm like, I love communism, but not the communism that we've seen. I love the communism we haven't seen. That is what Karl Marx said. We should do that. And then people are like, yeah, but, what about equality of opportunity versus equality of standing? And I'm like, well, I think that you still have an opportunity to do what you want to do. You just don't get any special bonuses for doing that thing versus somebody wanting to do a different thing. And also, labor, not exactly what you're doing, but how much of it, how much effort you're putting in, is where we derive value. That's the labor theory of value. And that's what is tied in with communism, is that they're saying, okay, so this chair is special and it's worth value because a specialist spent time making this chair. That's where we get the value from. So that's when they are like, okay, so because these people are putting in this work and you're putting in this work, just because they're different doesn't mean either one has any more value than the other one. So fairness would dictate that we pay them the same.
So in that situation, though, you said, like, people would get to do what they want to do, but I think that's almost impossible, because no matter what, there's going to be, like, the reason some people get paid more is because their jobs are undesirable jobs, or like they're hard jobs to do. Like, nobody's going to, in a socialist society, maybe 1 in a million crazy people will be like, yeah, I want to be the guy who crawls in and cleans out the sewers for the exact same pay as the person who gets to, sweep this, or like hand out food in a line or something. Like, there's a lot of jobs that are undesirable, and like CEOs of the big corporations and stuff, a lot of people think they're like just sitting there, smoking a cigar, doing nothing. But like those, like the big corporation, it's not like there's a lot of moving parts and stuff. And like a lot of people, like say a higher up lawyer, a super high up lawyer, say they're making a bunch of money, and people go, why does that person get to make so much money? Well, I mean, if they're putting in 80-hour work weeks and getting up in the middle of the night to, when a client calls them that's absolutely just living and wants somebody to fix something, like right that instant, or they'll go pay somebody else an insane amount of money to do it. There's a lot of stress that goes along with that. And like some people want 80-hour work. Like, nobody seeks out to go, yeah, I wish I could work 80 hours a week. It's like, sometimes that's just what you have to do to be the best, and people are just crazy enough to do that. And I want to kind of get back to what I was talking about before. Feminists have been like, I had Amber Hulse on the show earlier, and she was like, okay, so maybe there's no institutional things, but in society we like socialize, the way we socialize men and women, they tend to do different things. And I was like, is that bad? Like, because there's no, if you really think about it, there's no obvious thing saying that that's good or bad. Because like, say, what if you have like a female lawyer or something, and she works her way up and she gets to be like 30, and she's like insanely smart, and she hits like partner at her firm by 30, and like the height of her career, making a ton of money. But what if she decides she wants to have kids or something, or she like gets there and there's 80-hour work weeks, and maybe she doesn't want that, and so she voluntarily chooses to not do that job anymore? Is that a bad thing that they have the voluntary choice? Because a lot of these things, there's a lot of voluntary choice that I think you take away if you go towards something like forcing equality. Like, because obviously between any two groups you pick, there's going to be differences in different statistics. Because like, yeah, like if you take the gross mean statistic of pay, men make more than women. Okay, but I've already said, like you take it out by career choice and hours worked and stuff like that. And there's explanations for why it's not an institutional thing. It's not a sexist thing. But at the same time, men die in the workplace insanely more often than women. So like there was this equal pay day was last week or whatever, and it was like women would have had to work all of last year plus this far into this year to make the same amount of money that men made last year. But do you know when equal death day would be if men and women, like, so for the amount of deaths that men experienced in the workplace in 2018, women would have to go all of 2018 all the way up to, I believe, 2023 in like June or something of 2023. I might have that stat wrong, but it's either I was being conservative on my estimate. It's either that or it's further down the line. I can't remember, but it's just there's an insane difference. So people that are arguing that everything needs to, all the stats need to be identical, I think that's not a good, because like our goal should be equality of opportunity and the freedom to choose what you want to do, and it should not be forcing people into we should not be hindering some people so that other people, they can make the same amount as other people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. I think that that's an important distinction to draw. I was offering socialism in that it is a stance people can take, that you do value equality of position, and some people do because of, a line of philosophical reasoning. I'm not saying that I agree with that. I actually do agree with the capitalist standpoint. I think that some people earn, I think that earning a given pay or a given lifestyle is something that you definitely can do, and I think that some people haven't, because I'm a competitive person. I like to work, and I am the kind of person that I want to be the best at everything that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So I hate it personally when another person doesn't put in as much effort as me, and they seem to reap as much or more rewards than I, because it doesn't feel exactly proportional. It seems that like the amount of work you put in should be proportional to the amount of stuff that you're getting out of it. And I think that that's, important to draw. But if we're looking at the government, like you're saying, then we need to think about what the roles of government are. Are the roles of government to make sure that we all have the exact same pay? That every woman has the same pay as every other guy just because they're a different gender? I think that that's kind of odd. And I think that there's it's interesting that, that we have this view on racism and sexism that's been, reinforced in our minds through primary school education and further down the line from parents and society at large. But it seems to almost be flipped on its head at this point, that I think that those who are seeing a distinction, those people that draw attention to the distinction, they're the ones causing the problems now. Not necessarily the people that are, there definitely are white supremacists and older white males that are patriarchal and think that women should only have traditional gender roles. But there are a lot of people that are drawing distinction to it, that are part of the minority groups or part of the groups that used to be afflicted, such as women. I think that they're what's causing the problem. I think that what the call should be, instead of feminism, I think it should just be, the call should be to stop seeing the distinction.
That's what I've been preaching big time. And for those of you just tuning in, this is KOR 91.1 FM Vermilion. This is the show Just Hear Me Out. I'm your host, Peyton Byers, and with me in studio is Brayden Case. And we're having a philosophical discussion talking about gender and stuff like that right now. Philosophical things, pay gap, everything like that. But yeah, what you said I think is exactly right. We need to, because let's take a look at the Jussie Smollett hoax that just happened not that long ago. So he hired two Nigerian brothers who were one of them was his trainer, and they both acted on the TV show with him. And he hired them to pretend to be white Trump supporters to attack him in Chicago, to try and make up a race crime so then he could get all sorts of, to advance his career. But it's the people that keep trying to divide is what I think is about, taking that clip out of context that I talked to you about at the beginning of the show. People trying to make it look like Trump is more is worse than he actually is. If he's a bad guy, show the clips in context, show him as exactly what he is, nothing more, nothing less, and then let everybody decide. Don't try and skew, take him out of context and skew it. If he's a bad guy, we'll all be able to see he's a bad guy. And if he's not, it's eventually going to come out and you'll be exposed. But the people who keep reinforcing these what used to be, because like slavery, like African Americans, that used to be an actual, like a real problem. And there's still some people today that it is a problem. There's still white supremacists and stuff, but not nearly as many as there were before. And the media giving them all sorts of attention, and people just going ham and nonstop talking about like black people and white people as different groups. All you're doing by like creating that is making things worse. And that's why I've thought about it. And like like on campus, there's the like African American Student Union or something like that. There's a group that's like exclusively for African American students. And I thought about it, and I was like, is that because people are like, oh yeah, it's a good thing. And it's like, okay, it's great that there's groups on campus, but is that a good thing that we are defining groups based on like inherited character, like a characteristic that nobody has control over on themselves? Like, is it good? Like the amount of melanin in your skin, I don't have any control over that. Is it right that people are like drawing distinctions in groups based on that? And I think that's not right, and we should work to get rid of that.
I mean, you're right that drawing a distinction in and of itself it can be harmful, and that especially in the existence of Jussie Smollett and instances like that, that's a very specific, very off course example. But that's definitely a very good example of what I was saying earlier about how those people seem to almost have trying to make racism go the other way, because they're trying to I kind of see racism as like, if you define it, it's kind of like seeing another group and trying to impose like almost disadvantage on them due to like a characteristic of that group that necessarily is not true. If it's true, then then fine. But if it's not true, then it's bad. And that's when you see like women calling for them to have more jobs than guys do because they should have certain jobs just because they're women. It's basically just imposing disadvantage on the male gender and giving themselves advantage. And that's the only thing I see wrong with that. But I don't necessarily see distinction as being the issue, because it's a natural tendency of people to distinguish groups, natural tendency of people to group up. They feel better in groups that they can like feel a part of. Like when you come to USD and you join the honors program, it's a clear cut group. You're either in it or you're not. But it's not imposing disadvantage on anyone. It's giving people who have worked for it, people who have earned advantage. And that isn't anything wrong with that. And with your example of the African American Student Union or whatever it's called, that's not necessarily just a skin color thing, I don't think. I think it's more also like an ethnicity sort of thing.
Which
so
ethnicity that's fine, because like ethnicity can be like how you were raised and stuff like that. That's different.
Yeah.
But people
some people like to go by African Americans, people like to go by black. So
yeah, so like the things I have a problem, like ethnicity, if you want to like you want there to be a group where people from the same ethnic background hang out, that's fine. And maybe they are, that's what it's determined on. But I think it's when you get to the point where you're separating based on race. Like in Georgia, there was a mayoral race in Georgia, and they put signs up on the windows. It looked like it was just a reversed version of like the pictures you see in textbooks from the 1960s, and it said, "No white press allowed, only black press inside." And so they would not let any white reporters in. They would only let black reporters in. And it's things like that. And there's people who are like championing that on the left. And like intersectionality. Do you know what intersectionality is? Have you like talked about basically?
I mean, I can't give you a definition, but I generally know what you're talking about.
So yeah, like intersectionality, like they break people up into different groups. So like you can be a group broken up into groups based on gender, race,
Career.
Sexuality, like all sorts, like every characteristic you could think of that's like brought up in political conversation, and your opinion is then valued based on the intersection of all the groups you're in. So like the ultimate intersectional speaker would be like a black lesbian woman, and I don't like you keep going on like that, but intersectional, it basically values those people's opinions as higher than the opinions of somebody from like the lowest valued group is straight white male in the intersectional hierarchy. And I think that's just it's just degenerating into tribalism, and it makes things a lot worse in the country than they need to be. And like, it just completely removes any form of dialogue, because essentially you're saying, because of these immutable characteristics that you cannot have no control over and you cannot change, your argument is not valid, your argument will never be valid, and there's nothing we can do to change the validity of your argument because you have these characteristics that you can't change. I think doing that to somebody is the ultimate, like, there's no way to respond to it, because it's
an injustice.
Yes.
It feels, like I said, like the tables have been flipped, like almost like the racial stigma has been pointed the other way, on the other end of the stick, if you prefer. But like that is exactly what I was talking about earlier, is that, you know, it's imposing that inequality, and inequality is not good. It's actually bad in almost all instances. It's not bad if it's like, if you see it in a certain manner. So there are positive instances of inequality. So like if you look at intersectionality, and you look at a black lesbian transgender woman, or let's say, and then there's a straight white man. Okay, so there are instances where that person, with all their distinguishing characteristics, would be better for a certain thing than the straight white man, like being a counselor for other black, lesbian, transgender women. Okay, that white man is just not going to be nearly as good at that job as that woman is. So that's fine. Nobody has a problem with that. It's when you start to make these broad, general, stereotypical overtones, and stereotyping is, you know, like you're imposing like a generic is what it's called. And, you know, you can generally infer what a generic is. It's that it's like opposing a term on a group of people because they're in the group of people, not because of their own like personhood.
It's ignoring the individual and like just grouping them up with other people. Yeah.
And that's immoral to do that. It's immoral to impose disadvantage on somebody, because by doing that you're limiting their freedoms. And I think freedom is one of, if not the greatest value that we can hold if we're talking about imposing like a good government, if we're talking about treating each other, how we should treat each other, how we should live a good life. I think that one of the greatest values is freedom, and you limit someone's freedom if you do that. And that's exactly what you're talking about earlier when you're talking about equality of opportunity, is that freedom and that natural rights that everybody's claiming for in the government. It's because that is the goal, and that is completely against the goal. And I think that people have lost sight of what their values are when they're talking about intersectionality.
Well, we're going to go to a little break right here. We'll be right back after this for the last 10-15 minutes of the show. Thank you so much for listening. This is Just Hear Me Out on KOR 91.1 FM Vermilion. When we get back, we will continue this conversation and end the show. So yeah, see you then. Welcome back to Just Hear Me Out. I'm your host, Peyton Byers, here on KOR 91.1 FM Vermilion. This is Just Hear Me Out, as I've already said, and the opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of this station, the USD Department of Media and Journalism, or the University of South Dakota. I'm in studio with my guest, Brayden Case. Say hi.
Hello, this is me, Brayden Case. Glad to be here.
So we've been talking about, you know, all sorts of super interesting topics. It's been an interesting conversation. And what I wanted to get to for the last 10 minutes of the show here is marriage. So, like the social institution of marriage, and whether it's like why it's beneficial. And so some people, like some of the radical feminist movement, they're like, it's an oppressive system of the patriarchy to keep women under men's thumbs. And if you look at what's been happening recently, or like lately, so why then? Because like the people who are getting married, or statistically, it's like the rich people are getting married more than poor people are. And if you look at like single motherhood rates and stuff, are way higher in the poor population than like the rich people are getting married. So if it was a social institution that was, you know, like oppressive, why would the rich people be oppressing themselves? You know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
I guess if you look at any radical group, you'll hear some things that you don't necessarily understand. And it sounds like this feminist group that you're talking about is pretty radical. I mean, I don't think most people think that marriage is an oppressive, patriarchal institution. capitalist Catholic scum, and that's like I don't think that's necessarily the views of every feminist.
Probably
I think
not every feminist, but
we should like give a disclaimer that we don't think that feminists are bad. We don't hate you feminists. We love you too.
It's the radical feminists.
There's some of every group that we can all agree to hate.
Like if you're like the original feminists that were like, yeah, we want to vote and we want to be able to, play in the same playground as the boys do. Like, yeah, like equality, that's fine. That's great. But I'm looking at the people who are like trying to flip it on the other side and say men are evil all the time, and that's what a lot of modern feminism has become. And I don't necessarily think all of the people who are like, oh yeah, I guess I'd say I'm a feminist. Those people, I'm guessing, don't believe that stuff. But it's like the leaders, the people who are like out, marching stuff. It's a lot of those people, and I think it's kind of dangerous because if we let that keep going, because what is marriage essentially, right? So marriage is basically two people they're together and they're like, you're not so bad, right? And the other person's like, yeah, you are also not so bad. And they go, okay, let's handcuff ourselves together. We'll handcuff ourselves together and tell each other the truth. But we'll have the handcuffs on, so that way when we tell each other the truth, we can't run away from each other. And I think, rising divorce rates in society is a really detrimental thing, and I think that's like endangering just like societal fabric, and because then you're basically eliminating the whole purpose of marriage right there if you like make divorce easy and very, very like if divorce is like automatic, like go to, because there's people who get divorced within 3 months of getting married. There's people who don't even have the pictures from their wedding. I know somebody who's a photographer who they didn't even have the pictures printed from the wedding before the couple got divorced. And I think since divorce has become so socially acceptable and like sex outside of marriage has become so socially acceptable, I think we're devaluing marriage, and it's really detrimental for society, because if you look at what causes young men to be like end up in jail more and stuff, and just pretty much any negative statistic you can look at, the issue, like a very prominent correlation, is single motherhood. Like they don't have a father figure in the house. So I don't know.
So that's what you say the value of marriage is that we need to make sure that everybody has a proper environment when they're being raised.
Well, there's that, and also like individuals. I mean, most people. There's a few people who are just weird and don't need anybody at all. But most people, like, it's very beneficial to have somebody that they can talk to, right, and just say things to. And I think the benefit of marriage is you're handcuffed to that person, so you're vowing to trust each other. You're vowing to tell each other the truth on stuff. And so you have somebody that you can go to and talk to and trust and say, here, I made this really stupid decision. I made this huge mistake, and I feel absolutely horrible about it, and I'm beating myself up about it. And they can be there to hear it out and like talk you through with it. Where if you don't have something like that, you can drive yourself crazy,
Yeah, I definitely see your argument, and I don't think it's wrong. I think that marriage is interesting because it's not made for raising people. That's not why it's there. Marriage is there because it's like a religious thing. It's about, Christianity. It's not about America. It's not about the American subunit of the family. People tend to think of America as being Christianity. And given that I don't see it that way. I see marriage as kind of being like this, it's this religious thing that you go to church, and it's like you're together with the Lord, and then that's how you experience God and stuff. And I think that's fine. But I do think that it makes it, I don't necessarily correlate. I correlate, but I don't like causally connect like marriage with the family. I think that you can have a family that isn't married. I don't think that it's necessarily required. And I think that perhaps like the divorce, like when you say that, like, okay, so divorce being the family unit getting split up is bad. Mm-hmm. But maybe instead of saying we should make divorce harder, I think that kind of limits people's freedoms.
Well, I'm not saying make it harder. I'm saying it should be like it's become socially acceptable. Like, can we agree that, okay, whether you call it marriage or not, like even in the families that don't get married and they're like, it's still two people together and they have kids together or whatever, and like there's a family, and that being cohesive is important to the success. Like the emotional well-being, like they're better off if they stay together, right? Can we agree? Like,
Well,
so whether you call it, like whether it happens in a religious setting or not is irrelevant at this point, I think, because, I mean, you want people to stick together and keep that bond because it's a promise they
well,
make to each other.
sometimes though you don't.
I
Let's
mean,
say
obviously, if
a
it's
person-
abusive or something.
Well,
then you-
not necessarily that's abusive, but here, let me give you like a personal standpoint. I have two parents. Both of them were divorced before they were married, and I was, and myself and my sister were part of their family. But I think that my siblings weren't worse off because their parents got divorced. It's the fact that, you know, like those people that are the single mothers, that's the father not being a father. I think that there is an obligation to fathering your child or mothering your child, I suppose. Those single father rates aren't very high. I do think that there should be a responsibility to your kid. Don't get me wrong. I totally think that's a thing. I don't think that it should be imposed through marriage. I think that it should just be imposed. But also, like I have some siblings that I think are in varying degrees of being raised as well as the other ones. And I think that that wasn't because of the divorce, but because of the quality of the parent. So like my sister Devi, her dad, I felt like just wasn't as good at raising her as my dad raised me. So I think that I was better set up for success because of that. And I think that I think that's neither here nor there, is that because people cannot choose their parents, so you can't try to find a systemic solution to the problem, is what I'm saying.
Do you think it's so? It is like. Do you think that family splitting up though in general would be socially detrimental? Because like the situation you talked about got like there was somebody else that ended up coming in, and so like two parents were still present, right?
Right.
But not all the time when people split up is there another.
Well, you know, it's the person abandonment is bad. Is what I'm saying. Is that it's not necessarily that my dad came in and he tried to be a dad. It was because the fact that her dad was still there. I think that was detrimental, actually. I wish he almost would have abandoned her. You know? Because I think that quality of parenthood is something that you can't choose as a kid. You can't choose your parents. It's totally chosen for you by circumstance. It's part of an argument against existentialism, if I'm going to tie in what we were talking about earlier. But is that you can't choose. There's a lot of systemic things you can't choose. So there are just going to be people that are raised incorrectly because they have bad parents. And you can't fix that, unfortunately.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We had definitely an interesting discussion. That hour went by really fast. So thank you so much for coming on, Brayden. Don't forget to tune in to Just Hear Me Out next week, 3 p.m. on Monday on KOR 91.1 FM Vermilion. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. See you later.